The black woman entered the courthouse like any other morning. Officers Rick Donnelly and Brent Carnes thought they knew exactly what they saw. A lone figure to humiliate. Another powerless body to control. With sneers and false authority, they dragged her into a back room, cuffed her, and shaved her hair, laughing as clumps fell to the floor. To them, it was routine, cruel, but safe, because the system always shielded their misconduct. But arrogance is blinding. What they didn't know was that the woman they just brutalized was the presiding judge on their separate misconduct case. Their reckoning was inevitable. The morning sun cast long shadows across Judge Claudia Hayes's bedroom as she stood before her mirror, adjusting her silk blouse with practiced precision. Today was the culmination of months of preparation for a critical police misconduct hearing. She chose a charcoal gray pants suit that commanded respect without her judicial robe. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders as she gathered her briefcase, checking twice to ensure all essential documents were in place. Her badge, tucked securely in its leather case, represented not just authority, but a 2-decade journey through a system that hadn't always welcomed her presence. The crisp autumn air greeted her as she stepped onto the sidewalk. Claudia had always preferred walking to the courthouse, using the time to organize her thoughts. Her heels clicked against the concrete in a steady rhythm, matching the determined beating of her heart. As she approached the courthouse steps, the familiar limestone building loomed above her, its classical columns reaching toward the sky. Deputy Wallace stood at his post behind the metal detector, his face set in its habitual expression of disdain. She'd dealt with his subtle antagonism for years. The way he seemed to take particular pleasure in making certain people wait longer, check more thoroughly, submit to additional screening. Morning, Claudia said evenly, placing her briefcase on the conveyor belt. The metal detector beeped as she walked through. Wallace's lips curled into a sneer. Going to need you to step aside for additional screening. Before Claudia could respond, 2 patrol officers materialized beside her. Officer Rick Donnelly's bulk cast a shadow over her, while Officer Brent Carnes circled to her other side, his movements smooth and calculated. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us," Carnes said, his tone professionally cold. "You match the description of someone we're looking for." Claudia maintained her composure, though her pulse quickened. "There must be some mistake. I'm Judge Hayes." She reached for her badge case. "Sure you are," Donnelly cut in, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He snatched the badge case from her hand before she could open it. "And I'm the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court." "That badge is clearly fake," Carnes added, examining it with exaggerated scrutiny that a small crowd had begun to gather, maintaining a safe distance. Claudia could see the uncertainty in their faces. Courthouse regulars who recognized her, but were too afraid to speak up. A young clerk took half a step forward, then retreated when Donnelly shot him a warning glare. "This is completely unnecessary," Claudia stated firmly. "I have ID in my briefcase, if you'll allow me." "Hands behind your back," Donnelly barked, producing handcuffs with a flourish. "Now." Claudia's heart pounded against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady. "I will not. I am a federal judge, and you are making a serious mistake." Carnes moved behind her while Donnelly grabbed her wrist. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into her skin as they roughly secured her arms behind her back. The humiliation burned hot across her face, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. "Look at her acting all high and mighty," Donnelly sneered loud enough for the growing audience to hear. "Bet you thought that fancy suit would fool everyone, huh?" Wallace watched from his post, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He made no move to intervene, seemingly enjoying the spectacle. Claudia's briefcase sat abandoned on the conveyor belt. The echo of her footsteps mixed with the heavy boots of the officers as they pushed her forward. The morning light streaming through the courthouse windows caught the faces of staff members who pressed themselves against walls and ducked behind corners. Their eyes held recognition, fear, and shame, but none moved to help. They approached a door marked "Security Personnel Only." The security room was cramped and cold with bare concrete walls and harsh fluorescent lighting that made everything look sickly and pale. A metal chair sat in the center, bolted to the floor, a detail that made Claudia's stomach tighten. The air smelled of stale coffee and cleaning supplies. "Have a seat, Your Honor," Rick sneered, shoving Claudia toward the chair. She managed to maintain her balance despite the handcuffs, refusing to stumble. Her eyes swept the room, taking in every detail, memorizing every face. "You know," Rick said, leaning in close. "I've been wanting to meet you for a long time. Heard you were some hotshot judge who thinks she knows everything about police work. I know enough about the law to recognize multiple violations happening right now," Claudia replied. Rick walked to a cabinet and returned with electric clippers. The device hummed to life with an ominous buzz. "You know what they do in prison? They take away everything that makes you feel special. Your clothes, your jewelry," he grinned. "Your hair. This won't end well for any of you," Claudia said steadily. "Oh, I think it will," Brent said from behind her, his fingers digging into her shoulders. "Nobody's going to believe you over 3 respected officers. Right, Wallace?" Wallace shifted his weight, looking slightly uncomfortable, but making no move to intervene. "Just don't leave any marks." Rick brought the clippers close to Claudia's face, letting her feel the vibration against her cheek. "Wanna beg? Might make me go easier on you." Claudia stared straight ahead, her silence more powerful than any words. This seemed to anger Rick, whose face flushed red. The first pass of the clippers cut a harsh line through her carefully styled hair. Dark locks fell to the floor in clumps. Rick worked sloppily, intentionally leaving patches and uneven spots. "Smile." Brent pulled out his phone, snapping photos. Claudia focused on her breathing, slow and measured. She thought about every case she'd presided over, every victim who'd sought justice in her courtroom. Each humiliating stroke only hardened her resolve. "Getting boring now," Rick grumbled, disappointed by her continued composure. He roughly brushed hair from her shoulders, each touch meant to demean. "That's enough," Wallace said finally, pushing away from the door. "You've made your point. Get her out of here before someone comes looking." Rick unclipped the handcuffs with unnecessary force. He grabbed Claudia's badge from the counter and tossed it at her feet where it clattered against the concrete. "Go tell your boss what happens when you cross us," Brent said, opening the door. Claudia stood slowly, her legs steady despite everything. She bent down with deliberate grace to retrieve her badge, tucking it into her pocket. Chunks of her hair clung to her jacket and blouse. She made no move to brush them away. She straightened her spine and began walking toward the courtroom, each step measured and purposeful, leaving her tormentors behind. The federal courtroom buzzed with anticipation, packed wall to wall, with reporters clutching notepads and community activists wearing protest buttons. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden benches. At the defense table, officers Rick Donnelly and Brent Carnes sat with easy smirks, their uniforms pressed and badges gleaming. The court clerk stood, shuffling papers nervously. "All rise. The United States District Court is now in session." The Honorable Judge Claudia Hayes presiding. The heavy doors at the back of the chambers swung open. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery as Claudia entered. Her bald head bore angry red marks where the clippers had scraped too close. Under the harsh courtroom lights, every patch and uneven spot from Rick's brutal handiwork was clearly visible. Claudia walked with measured steps toward the bench, her back straight, her expression carved from stone. Her black, judicial robe was draped over her arm, the thick fabric a shield she had worn countless times before. The whispers grew louder, spreading through the rows like wildfire. "Oh my God, what happened to her hair? Is that really Judge Hayes?" Someone attacked her. At the defense table, Rick and Brent's smug expressions froze, then crumbled as recognition dawned. Their faces drained of color so quickly they might have been dunked in ice water. Their attorney leaned in, whispering frantically, his hands making sharp, agitated gestures. Claudia ascended the steps to her chair, every movement deliberate and controlled. She slipped on her judicial robe with practiced ease, the familiar weight settling across her shoulders. When she sat, her presence seemed to fill the entire chamber. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and steady. The microphone carried her words to every corner of the suddenly silent room. "This is case number 2023, CR 405, United States versus Officers Richard Donnelly and Brent Carnes on charges of civil rights violations under color of law." Rick's leg bounced rapidly under the table. Brent stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle twitched in his cheek. Their attorney scribbled frantically on his legal pad, occasionally shooting panicked glances at his clients. Are both parties ready to proceed? Claudia asked as if this were any other day in her courtroom. The prosecution stood first, a tall woman with steel gray hair. Ready for the United States, Your Honor. The defense attorney jerked to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Your Honor, the defense requests an immediate sidebar. Denied, Claudia said, her tone brooking no argument. Are you prepared to proceed, counsel? But, Your Honor, a simple yes or no will suffice. The attorney tugged at his collar. Yes, Your Honor, but we have serious concerns about. Your concerns are noted. You may be seated. The morning proceeded with a parade of witnesses describing systematic abuse. A young black man testified about being choked. A store owner described surveillance footage that mysteriously disappeared. Each story built upon the last, painting a damning picture. Claudia sat alone at her kitchen table that night, the TV murmuring in the background. Breaking news in the federal courthouse scandal, the anchor announced. The union representative declared, "This is a clear abuse of judicial power. Judge Hayes is clearly emotionally compromised and unfit to preside over this case. The judge's behavior shows clear signs of emotional instability," a silver-haired legal expert proclaimed. Any defendant would be right to question her impartiality after today's display. But what about the allegations that these officers assaulted her? A younger commentator countered. Allegedly assaulted, another pundit interrupted. We only have her word for what happened this morning. Where's the security footage? Where are the witnesses? Her phone buzzed. Marcus texted, "Turn on channel 7. D.A. Denton's making his move." Claudia switched channels. District Attorney Harold Denton's practiced smile filled the screen, his carefully chosen words dripping with false concern. While any allegations of misconduct must be taken seriously, Denton said, straightening his tie, we must also ensure our judicial process remains untainted by personal vendettas. I've spoken with several colleagues who share my concerns about Judge Hayes's objectivity in this matter. The sound of chanting filtered through her windows. Claudia moved to the living room, peering through the curtains. Two groups of protesters faced off across her front lawn. On one side, supporters held signs reading "Justice for Judge Hayes" and "End Police Brutality." On the other, angry faces shouted "Back the blue" and "Remove the biased judge." Claudia stood before her bathroom mirror. Her hand traced the rough patches on her scalp. They thought they could paint her as hysterical, unstable, unfit. Her bare head wasn't a mark of shame. It was evidence of their brutality. "They won't break me," she whispered to her reflection. Not a hope or a prayer, but a statement of fact. The next morning, Marcus paced before her desk, clutching a manila envelope. "Someone slipped this under my apartment door? This is dynamite." Internal affairs reports, civilian complaints, medical records, years of documented misconduct, all carefully buried. "Look at the pattern," Marcus said, pointing to highlighted sections. Donnelly and Carnes worked together for 6 years. Every time they're accused of excessive force, the same names appear. Wallace handling security, internal affairs burying the complaints, union reps blocking investigations. Claudia's fingers traced a photo of a young man's bruised face. The report beneath it had been marked unfounded despite multiple witness statements. "How many?" she asked. 27 complaints in 6 years, Marcus replied. "All buried, all involving minorities or protesters. And those are just the ones that made it into official records." A knock at her chamber door made them both freeze. Marcus quickly gathered the papers, ready to hide them, but Claudia raised her hand. "Enter," she called out. A man stepped in. Early 40s, plain clothes, detective's badge on his belt, tired eyes that had seen too much. He closed the door quietly behind him. "Detective Alan Price," he introduced himself, voice low. "I'm sorry to intrude, Your Honor." But he glanced at Marcus. "My clerk stays," Claudia said firmly. "What can I do for you, detective?" Price's shoulders slumped with visible relief. "I've been waiting for someone to finally stand up to them. When I saw what happened to you yesterday," he shook his head, "I can't stay quiet anymore. I worked with Donnelly and Carnes for 3 years," Price began. "Watched them plant evidence, falsify reports, rough up suspects. When I tried reporting it, Wallace would lose the paperwork. I kept records, detailed notes, copies of original reports, even audio recordings. You understand what you're risking?" Claudia asked gently. Yesterday, my daughter asked me why the police hurt a judge. She's 12. If you can stand, I can stand. That afternoon, Price took the witness stand. His hands trembled slightly as he was sworn in, but his voice remained steady. Claudia observed him from the bench, noting how the other officers in the gallery glared at him with naked hostility. Detective Price, the prosecutor began, how long have you worked with Officers Donnelly and Carnes? 3 years in narcotics, Price replied. From 2020 to 2023. And during that time, what patterns of behavior did you observe? Price's eyes flickered briefly to Rick and Brent at the defense table. They had a system. They'd target specific types of people, minorities, protesters, anyone they thought wouldn't have the means to fight back. They'd plant evidence, falsify reports, use excessive force. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Rick's face darkened, his jaw clenching visibly. Rick suddenly exploded from his chair. You lying piece of garbage. You're dead, Price. Order, Claudia commanded. Remove Officer Donnelly and add witness intimidation to his charges. When Claudia walked to her car that evening, she found it defaced with red spray paint. Traitor, screamed across the driver's side. The tires were slashed, windows broken. She stood perfectly still, studying the damage. The message was clear, they were escalating. But she felt only certainty. Marcus was working late when Lydia Cruz called, her voice trembling. I can't keep it anymore. They know I have it. She handed him a USB drive. I recorded everything they did to Judge Hayes. The whole thing. Chief Judge Whitaker called me into his office, Lydia said frantically. He was different, cold. He said it would be best if I forgot anything I might have seen. Hours later, Claudia called Marcus. They fired her. Lydia was escorted out, and the official evidence copy is gone. Supposedly a technical error. Marcus placed the USB drive on her desk. This is how Whitaker's always operated. Through proxies, through pressure, through quiet threats. Claudia locked the drive in her safe. Lydia risked everything. We won't let her sacrifice be for nothing. Chief Judge Whitaker stood behind his mahogany desk. Judge Hayes, please have a seat. Claudia remained standing. I prefer to keep this brief, Chief. There are concerns about your continued involvement in the Donnelly Carnes case. The defense has raised valid points about potential bias. There is no conflict. I'm more than capable of maintaining judicial impartiality. That unfortunate incident is precisely why you should consider recusing yourself. The dignity of the court. Claudia's laugh was sharp. Where was your concern for dignity when 2 officers dragged me into a back room and shaved my head? That matter is being investigated internally. By whom? The same people who buried Deputy Wallace's harassment complaints. Whitaker's eyes narrowed. Those complaints were handled according to protocol. Protocol? I've seen the files, Chief. Every complaint against Wallace was marked, reviewed, and dismissed, with your signature on each one. Color drained from Whitaker's face. You're not authorized to access those records. You wanted me to recuse myself. Request denied. I'm seeing this through. You're treading dangerous ground, Judge Hayes. You have no idea what you're risking. My integrity isn't negotiable. Unlike yours. The morning news hit like a tidal wave. Federal judge accused of assaulting deputies blazed the headlines. A carefully edited security photo showed Claudia at the metal detector, her hand raised, but cropped out Wallace's aggressive stance. Her phone buzzed. Marcus. Judge, turn on Channel 4. A crowd had gathered outside the courthouse. Resign now. No biased judges. Support our police. They're bussing them in, Marcus explained. Union organizers, off-duty officers. Any word from Alan? Silence. That's why I called. Alan was attacked last night. He's in intensive care. At the hospital, Alan lay still, his face a mass of purple bruises, tubes snaking from his arms. Despite his injuries, his gaze was fierce when he saw her. They wanted the files from my personal safe. I didn't give them up. You should have, Alan. No, those files prove everything. The pattern of cover-ups, the payoffs, the witnesses who were threatened. All of it leads back to Whitaker and Denton. When Claudia returned home, she found a white envelope taped to her door. Inside was a photo of Alan's unconscious body in his driveway, blood pooling beneath him. On the back, next time we won't stop. Claudia's hands didn't shake. Standing there in the growing dark, she felt something beyond fear. Something harder that had been growing since they first put those clippers to her head. The courthouse loomed ahead like a fortress under siege. Protesters filled the steps, their signs bobbing like angry waves. FBI agents arrived, their badges glinting. Special Agent Diana Chen approached. Judge Hayes, we've opened a formal investigation into systemic corruption within this courthouse. I have documentation, Claudia said. Files that prove the pattern. We'll need those. You should know, there's intense pressure to shut this down. I won't be intimidated, Claudia replied. As Claudia took the bench, Chief Judge Whitaker intercepted her. A word, Claudia. Recuse yourself now, or face a formal review of your fitness to serve. Are you threatening me, Chief Whitaker? I'm trying to save your career. Think about your legacy. I am. That's exactly why I'm seeing this through. The room fell silent as she took the bench. Marcus passed her a note. Security footage recovered from 3 news sources. They can't bury it all. Court is in session, Claudia announced. From her elevated position, she could see Agent Chun settling into the gallery. Chief Judge Whitaker stood at the back, his face darkening. That night, alone in her chambers at 11:23 p.m., the night guard delivered a plain manila envelope. Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten note. Judge Hayes, I'm sorry I ran. They threatened my family, but I couldn't let them bury the truth. The footage is all here, unedited, time-stamped. Use it wisely. Lydia, Claudia's hands trembled as she played the video. The security footage showed everything in brutal clarity. The false arrest, the forced march, the cruel spectacle of the shaving. Rick's face twisted with cruel enjoyment. Brent's hands gripping her shoulders. Wallace watching, not participating but not intervening. She paused on Rick's laughing face. How many others had they humiliated? The timestamp proved authenticity. There could be no denying what happened. Her career could be collateral damage. They'd call her biased, unstable. But wasn't this exactly why she'd become a judge? She ejected the flash drive, holding it up to the light. Tomorrow would change everything. The federal courthouse buzzed with anticipation. Every seat filled. Camera crews lined the back wall. Rick and Brent sat at the defense table, their usual swagger replaced by nervous glances. Claudia entered, her robe flowing behind her. The overhead lights gleamed off her bare scalp. Before we proceed with today's testimony, the court has new evidence to enter into record. She began reading Deputy Wallace's complete disciplinary file. Page after page, racial profiling, excessive force, abuse of power, all swept under the rug. April 22, 2023. Deputy Wallace assisted Officers Donnelly and Carnes in the illegal detention and assault of a federal judge. She looked directly at Rick and Brent. That judge was me. Claudia pressed a button. The large screens flickered to life. The court will now view security footage from that day. The gallery watched in horror. Gasps echoed through the courtroom at the sound of their laughter, their taunts preserved for all to hear. Rick lurched to his feet. This is garbage. We were doing our job. Sit down, Officer Donnelly. You can't show this. Brent joined in, panic breaking through. Your job was to protect and serve justice. Instead, you chose to abuse your authority. You chose cruelty, believing your badges would shield you from consequences. A commotion at the back drew attention. Special Agent Catherine Martinez entered with federal credentials. I'm with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. We're here to take custody of all courthouse records. The Department of Justice has determined this case represents a potential pattern of systemic civil rights violations. We'll be conducting a full investigation of the courthouse, police department, and district attorney's office. Rick and Brent sat deflated. Their earlier bravado evaporated. Their cruelty was now exposed for all to see that on sentencing day, the courtroom was even more crowded. Rick and Brent sat in orange jumpsuits. Deputy Wallace sat separately. Chief Judge Whitaker's seat was empty. He was being processed at the federal courthouse, facing his own indictment. D.A. Denton had resigned. Deputy Wallace, you have pleaded guilty to conspiracy against rights, abuse of authority, and obstruction of justice over 27 separate incidents spanning 12 years. Claudia's gaze was unwavering. This court sentences you to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years supervised release. You are permanently barred from any law enforcement position. Officers Donnelly and Carnes, please rise. They stood, chains clinking. Throughout this trial, you have shown no remorse. Your actions represent the worst abuse of police power. Richard Donnelly, This court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison. Brent Carnes, 15 years in federal prison. Both permanently barred from any law enforcement position. Let today's sentences send a clear message. The law is not a shield for the powerful. It is a sword for the people. No badge, no robe, no office grants immunity from justice. The gallery erupted in applause. Rick and Brent were led away in chains, their former swagger replaced by defeated shuffling. Weeks passed. The courthouse looked different now, not just physically with new security protocols and civilian oversight stations, but in spirit. Where fear once ruled, there was now accountability. Marcus hurried up with his tablet. Judge Hayes, have you seen the news? The president's office had announced her nomination as chief judge of the district, praising her unwavering courage. Community leaders waited in her chambers. Judge Hayes, you've done what decades of activism couldn't, Reverend Thompson said. You turned personal humiliation into systemic change. Other districts are adopting our reforms, Professor Chen added. They're calling it the Hayes model. Claudia stood before her mirror. Her hand moved to her head with purpose. The bald scalp that had once marked her humiliation had become something else, a symbol. Women in the community had started shaving their heads in solidarity. What was meant to shame her had become a crown of defiance. The afternoon sun streamed through the high windows as Claudia entered the courtroom. The gallery was full, but transformed. These were faces bright with purpose and hope. Public defenders sat confidently. Police officers stood respectfully, their new training evident. All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Claudia Hayes presiding. Claudia took her place at the bench. She lifted the gavel, feeling its weight. No longer just a symbol of order maintained through force, but of justice served through truth and accountability. As she brought it down, the sound echoed through the chamber. The day's session would begin. Cases would be heard. Justice would be served. And this time it would be real justice.